Southern Baptist Convention does this big vote. I guess it's their national convention back in June.
It's the largest Protestant denomination in
America.
In the country. Yeah. And I mean, we should make it clear, like the Southern Baptist Convention has roots that go back to the Civil War.
Yes.
And there's a reason why they're called the Southern Baptists.
Yes, because the Northern Baptists, or I guess the regular Baptists, I don't know how you want to define them, they were against slavery.
Yeah.
And they were more in the movement of the abolition of slavery.
Yeah.
And so the Southern Baptists, good old people in the South, were for slavery. Yeah. And then there was
a break off.
Yeah.
And I actually have a video on my YouTube channel about this and chronicling one of the prominent Southern Baptist seminaries, and it's publicly racist roots that the 4 of the key founders were all members of the KKK. Like, this isn't some exaggeration or historical redaction. Like, this is...
It's just known. It's there.
Let's just...
call a thing a thing.
Yeah, look at history for what it is. Mm-hmm. But in 1995, the Southern Baptist Convention passed a resolution back then kind of repudiating and trying to distance themselves from their racist roots. But for many people, there was a sense of dissatisfaction with that. They felt like there really wasn't enough that was happening in terms of, maybe we could call, I hate to use this word because it has a particular meaning, but I can't think of a different word, is equity of leadership.
So they weren't seeing enough leadership, enough diverse leadership across the board. Is that
qualified diverse leadership, yeah. And so now we're in a situation where some of the Southern Baptist seminaries, Southeastern Baptist in particular, is really kind of advocating for aspects of critical race theory. And so that led to the events in June with the passage of Resolution 9, which I think Bob has a screen of the resolution. If people want to check it out, I'll put it in the show notes. But the question of what is our relationship to critical race theory and intersectionality. Maybe you could give a brief definition of what that is.
So intersectionality looks directly at oppression and how many different ways a person could potentially be oppressed. So women would be oppressed to men, but because I am a Black woman, the place where my womanhood and my African-Americanness or my Blackness meets would be an intersection. Okay. Does that make sense?
So you would be in a more oppressed category than I would,
because you would be a white woman,
right?
Yes.
But if you were a black female and a lesbian, you would have
I would have 2 intersections. So I would have, or 3, however you want to look at it. But if you were a white woman who is a lesbian, you would have 1 intersection because this is where your oppression intersects, your womanhood and your lesbianism.
Okay. So that's what that means. So in particular, the line of debate is this line number 2, whereas critical race theory is a set of analytical tools that explain how race has and continues to function in society. And intersectionality is the study of how different personal characteristics overlap to inform one's experience. This line is really the genesis, in large part, to this new documentary that just came out a couple weeks ago. It's called By What Standard?
Yes.
And it is put out by a group within the Southern Baptist Convention. I call them the dissenters. It's called Founders Ministries. And they are trying to push back on the infiltration of social justice, critical theory, critical race theory, feminism, and all of those connected ideas, in saying, no, these are not just analytical tools. This is
actually a framework and a worldview.
Yeah.
And they're pushing back specifically against critical theory, the umbrella that houses things like feminist theory, queer theory, and critical race theory.
And I think a lot of people would probably be like, man, this is so academic. Like, why? How does this pertain to me? But this is really going to pertain to a whole lot of people in about 5 years when you have a slew of graduates coming into hundreds or thousands of Southern Baptist churches that have been educated in these seminaries where critical theory is being taught.
Yeah.
And that is going to start trickling down to the pews.
I mean, I see that now. I think I told everybody about a graduation I went to earlier this year, and seeing people who were proponents of critical race theory at that graduation and just what that means as a young person coming into the church and wanting to come into leadership and, housing these ideas in this framework. But I think we have a clip that we're going to go to.
So this is the opening scene from the documentary, and all of our apologies to the filmmakers. We hope you know that we're just playing this because we want to give you guys some promotion.
Yeah.
And not try to steal your content. We want to encourage people, go watch the whole documentary.
Yes, please do. It's highly informative.
Yeah. So this is just the opening scene. And just to set the stage here, that you're going to see 3 gentlemen sitting at a table. The guy on the left is a Christian. The 2 guys on the right are agnostics or atheists. They are what they would characterize themselves as liberal progressives, but they do not buy into critical theory.
Yes, Peter Boghossian is the one sitting on the far right, and he just wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal maybe 3 weeks ago
that we tried to talk about on the show last week, but thank you, Wall Street Journal, for hiding all your articles behind a registration wall.
But he really talks about how academia is becoming just swayed by critical race theory, and there's really no real room to come against it or to stand against it.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Okay.
I have had in the back of my mind that if this were at the height of the New Atheist movement, and when, we were extremely involved in that, if I wanted a plan, if I were going to design a plan to bring
right? Oh yeah, I know where you're going.
The whole thing down.
All of Christianity. Let's end Christianity. How do we do it?
Yeah, how would you do it?
Make them woke.
Yep.
It'll eat itself from the inside.
Yep. And then
I'm not the old guard atheist I alluded to earlier. But if I were the old school angry atheist, it's like, let's just throw rocks at the cathedral till it falls down. I'd start making woke pastors and sending them in. Because they're going to tear everything apart. Yeah. Because they're going to make everything about identity.
It's inevitable.
And that's all they talk about.
That got our attention.
Yes, there that was.
That got our attention because we had watched another documentary with these 2 gentlemen the night before, and talking about their project, which would be a whole other great video to do sometime. But it got our attention, like, wow, they even see the danger of
the
this.
Atheist can see the danger of accepting this worldview within the church and how catastrophic and destructive it is.
And how against historic Christianity it is. Like, oh, if you want to destroy the church, you don't need to throw rocks at a cathedral or burn it to the ground. You just need to get in.
Your pastor's woke.
Yeah.
But we can't see it.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Do you want to go right to the next clip, or do you want to?
We can unpack this one a little bit more. I want to hear your thoughts about it because that just got my attention big time.
Well, again, this brings me to Christianity and culture and how, and I may sound a little harsh. I'm going to put that out there at the outset. And you've, brought me correction on this and offered, me some guidance and been like, hey, slow down. It's not like the whole church, or, watch your language. And I'm still struggling because, and I'm just going to be honest, folks, for me, it feels like the church is not talking or not up on game with what's happening in culture. Yeah. And because we're not understanding the movement of culture, then we accept anything that may sound good So this, and I don't know if
Yeah.
you're giving me the look, and you
No.
guys feel free to chime in.
No, go.
And like I'm open to hearing it, but it sounds like, or not even, but, and for me it feels like, we're not having these conversations, race or gender or other things, and so the world sees the need. The world sees the hurt, they see injustice, they see however you want to define it. And then they begin to have these conversations and say, hey, you guys aren't talking about this. You need to adopt this. But what if we had a heartbeat on culture as well? And it doesn't mean that we need to adopt culture by any means, but if we understood more of what was happening, if we were maybe
we're
a
at
little
least-
bit more outward, I don't know.
I think that what you're highlighting is that in the church, we have a tendency to just talk about certain topics. And I think that part of the reason that critical race theory has made such inroads into so many formerly conservative or still conservative on paper churches and seminaries is because it offers a way to live out your faith in a very tangible framework. It's like, okay, I believe in Jesus, but I don't want to just sit in my church. I want to go out and show the world love. I want to go out and make a difference and show that Christianity really makes a difference. But there hasn't been a lot of that happening. There's a tendency in the church that we form our own kind of parallel culture, and we get in our little ghetto mindset of, we're just going to talk mostly to each other. Mm-hmm. And we don't pay attention to the larger consequences of the ideas that are happening in the world around us. And by and large, Christians usually come along to the culture conversation a bit late. And so meanwhile, the culture is having discussions about, hey, we're noticing these marginalized people, and hey, we know that there's needs here, and hey, we want to do some things. And then the church is left behind because the perception is we're not doing anything. And so I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yes. And I mean, it brings me to the question of how do pastors shepherd people who are going out on the Monday through Saturday and hearing these conversations and experiencing the life that happens at the workplace that may be infiltrated or infested with CRT, and then coming back into church. How do we deal with that part? Like, how do I bring healing or hope or some kind of acknowledgement to the real experience that person is experiencing in culture?
Yeah. And sometimes there's a tendency, I think, for us as evangelicals to not tie our faith in to the real world and what is happening in culture. Mm-hmm. What are people talking about at work? One of the reasons I wanted to start this show in the first place was to kind of show people how theology comes to bear on real life, on all of these conversations we're having in the culture, and that historic Christianity does have things to say. But I think that sometimes some churches get so caught up in how can we become like the culture? How can we sort of blend into the culture? Which I think that is a different error. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested. Do people need to know about critical theory? Yes, they do. Christians need to understand some things about critical theory, but they need to do so that we can reach people with the gospel by understanding how they think.
Yes.
Not so that we can become like them.
Yes.
Those are two different reasons and motivations to understand critical theory. I don't want to become like the world.
Yes.
I want to tear down every framework and every construct that comes against the gospel and the Most High God. But I have to know something about how these people think.
Yes, and you highlight something that's really important, because when you don't understand how people think or what at least a small basis is of their construct, then you're able to accept because it might sound good.
Yeah.
because we want to love, and we'll talk about that later on, but we want to love, and so because we want to love, and this sounds warm and fuzzy at the outset,
Yeah.
then we should probably accept this.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the second clip here. And we thought that this offered a really good kind of overview, historical overview of where critical theory comes from.
Yes.
And it's a little bit of an extended clip, but this guy gives a very nice little history lesson. So let's watch this about the origin of critical theory.
And what's going on, we've got to start with Marx. Okay, Karl Marx believed that the world, everything in the world was just matter and energy. He was a materialist. Everything is physical. And as a result, he saw all of history moving forward in terms of one economic system being replaced by another. And basically everything was determined by the economic system. The politics, the religion, the ideology, everything was there to preserve a particular economic system. Now, he predicted that there would be a proletariat revolution, a revolution of the urban workers. It didn't happen. So you get an Italian communist named Gramsci in the early to mid 20th century who looked at the reason why, and his conclusion was that the problem really lay in what he called the hegemony. That is to say, essentially the worldview or the ideology that the bourgeoisie, the propertied classes, promoted. He said the problem is the proletariat bought into the hegemony. And so what we need to do is to create what he called a counter-hegemony. The idea here being that we're going to come up with a new ideology, a new worldview. This will be done through a combination of the intellectuals and the workers that will give them an alternative way of seeing the world and help them realize the fact that they're really oppressed. Further, he extended it beyond just economics. And this is particularly what's going to happen in much more detail after Gramsci with the Frankfurt School and other thinkers. They're going to argue that oppression isn't just economic. It's not just owners versus workers the way it was in Marx. It's all kinds of other forms of oppression. And so the world divides up, in Marx, the world divides up between owners and workers, which correspond to oppressors and oppressed. In these new worldviews that are emerging out of critical theory, oppressors and oppressed go way beyond just owners and workers. It's racial oppression, it's sexism, it's homophobia, it's transphobia, it's Islamophobia, it's fill-in-the-blank phobia. It's all of these things. So they're constantly looking to find new oppressed classes to join in their vision of a better world brought about by bringing down the oppressors and theoretically at least raising up the oppressed. And critical theory is really built around an analysis of society that says that everything really revolves around power structures. And the power structures are there to keep the oppressors in place and to keep the oppressed in their place. There are a lot of other ideas that tie into this. They think of everything in terms of a zero-sum game. The reason why racism exists is because whites take power from people of color. The reason why sexism exists is that men take power from women. It's a zero-sum game. There's always, in order for one person to move forward or one group to move forward, they have to oppress, take power away from someone else. So it's all a power game, and it all really builds around politics, it builds around language, and a whole host of related issues that fundamentally come back down to the idea that matter and energy is all that exists. It's all materialism. And everything that we think we know about the world is conditioned by our culture. It's conditioned by the hegemony. So if you can control the hegemony, you can control how people understand the world, and you can literally change reality. All of that is wrapped up in critical theory.
Well,
Oh, we cut off his last line, but his last line, or somewhere in the video, he says, but this has only been around for 60 years.
Yes.
You know? And so Christianity has been around for 2,000 years. And I think that I'm always a skeptic of a new paradigm or somebody has a new theology or a new framework or a new way of seeing things, and then they want to bring it into Christianity. I'm like, look, my job is to contend for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. Those things that are all agreed upon among us. My job is not to incorporate every newfangled sociological idea into the church. Or 20 years ago in the 90s, we were incorporating marketing and business ideas into the church for church growth programs. That's not my concern. My concern is to contend earnestly for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. I want to contend for the faith of the apostles and the martyrs. I want to contend for that faith. If there's a framework that came about 60 years ago, that's interesting. I want to know about it because right now that's the water that my children are swimming in. That's the water of the culture that, that they're swimming in and they don't even realize they're swimming in it. That's the messages that are coming through all the media and all the education, all the books, all the conversations on social media. It's all coming through that filter, that worldview, that lens. And I want to know about it. But I'm not going to rush to bring it into the church.
Yes.
I need to keep these worlds separate. And that summary, and it shows how complicated critical theory really is.
Yes. And also, one of the things that I liked that he said at the end was how it's connected to so many other things. It's all the phobias. If you accept this one view, then you're just naturally accepting this other view. One of the things that you brought up a couple of days ago or a week ago or so, about our talk at WIA and explaining exactly how critical...
Women in apologetics. Yeah.
Yes, hello, I'm wearing my shirt, Women in Apologetics. Sorry. Please excuse there we go.
There it is.
The break. But one of the things that you mentioned is critical theory is like a train. And so when you have critical theory as the driving engine, right behind it you have critical race theory. Right behind that, hooked together in the next car is feminist theory. Hooked in the next car would be
queer theory.
And then in the next car
there's other cars coming.
Yes. And what I didn't want to talk about because I don't know enough about it, but fat studies. And
fat activism.
Yes, is another version in this critical theory vein. So it's just another car. They're all hooked together and you can't say that I accept this one because I like what it does, but I don't accept this one because I may not be for LGBTQ theory.
Right. And this is the conundrum that the Southern Baptists are getting into because they want to accept critical race theory. Like, okay, yeah, we want to have race conversations and that's good, but they want to reject feminist theory and queer theory. But at the end of the video on By What Standard is the video documentary that we're talking about tonight, the filmmakers show how feminism and queer theory are already coming into the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yes.
And people don't understand these are cars that are all hooked together. And you had the analogy of the mouse.
Yes. The mouse. So I don't know why I know this, but like if a mouse can get his nose through the tip of any opening, he's able to like wiggle his body all the way through the other parts. And that's kind of how I see critical theory and all of the other subsequent cars. If one part is able to sneak through, all of the rest of it is going to come through too. But again, in looking at...
under the banner of equity.
Yes.
Everything is about equity. You have to understand that our culture is now in a conversation where the highest good, the highest moral good is that of equity and justice. And so when they say, well, we don't want you to impose your morality on us, they're not saying that they have no morality. They're just saying they have a different standard of morality. And that is what they are going to say, here is what is good, true, and beautiful. Their version of equity. But that train is eventually going to get into feminism and queer theory and conversations about equity, because if there's no room for, this group of oppressed people or victims, then there's no room for this group and this group and this group, and along that train goes.
Yeah.
So,
And this is why it's important that we understand what's happening in culture. We don't have to accept what's happening in culture. And in my opinion, we should be a voice against it, and we should be leading a different way. We should have our own train.
yes.
And we should be on a different train to show culture. This is how we do it. This is what really works. Because in the end, this isn't going to work. This is a framework that's not going to work. Let's just be clear.
Because it gets people just pitted against each other.
Yes.
And silencing each other. If you don't get into there's only one view that's allowed.
Yeah.
There's only one outcome that's allowed. And if you don't get in line with that, you will be silenced.
Yes. Cancel culture.
Yeah.
But in not understanding that, like I said earlier, we will accept or we will dabble in. And this, people, is not something that we can dabble in. We cannot, I think my grandmother used to say, like, you don't give the devil a pinky because he'll have you up to your elbow. This is one of those things. You cannot dabble in this and think that you won't be swallowed whole by all of the other parts that come with it.
I think that it's hard because technically, and I think Neil Shenvi made a really good case for this in his response to Resolution 9 that was passed by the Southern Baptists in June. He says, technically you could call critical theory an analytical tool, but that's really not how most people use it. Most people use it as a theoretical framework or as a worldview, whatever term you want to call that. And so while this is technically on paper accurate, that they can just sort of use it in this limited kind of a way, nobody uses it that way.
Yes.
And that is the real conundrum. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, no one uses it that way to the extent that if you don't see it this way, you will be fired.
Yes.
If you don't see it this way, then you are standing against the gospel. This is not just like, oh, let me put on my glasses because I can't see far away. No, this is the glasses that change everything. I'm standing against God and against the gospel. So basically what they're saying is that their analytical tool tells me that I am wrong in my definition of gospel and my definition of my life experience and my service to God, so to speak. But how does an analytical tool do that? No, that would be more of a framework or an ideology.
Yeah.
Unless I'm wrong.
No, and I think that it's important for people to understand that then the outcome of using this so-called analytical tool of critical theory, you have to then, if you're going to import it into Christianity, you have to start having different conversations about redefining critical doctrines. Doctrines like the original sin, repentance, forgiveness, the gospel itself.
Yeah.
And so they can say on paper, I affirm inerrancy, I affirm all the historic doctrines of Christianity, but then they've got this framework that they want to put on it. And we already see these redefinitions trying to happen at the seminary level. And regular people need to care about this because woke theology is coming to a church near you.
Yeah.
And if you are on an elder board, if you are in church leadership, you need to know about these things so that when a pastor comes to candidate at your church, you can recognize this. You can ask questions in the interview. What do you think about social justice?
Yeah.
What do you think about woke theology? These are the questions people are going to have to start asking in job interviews when you're interviewing a new youth pastor, a new senior pastor, when you're having conversations about who's going to serve on the elder board, because where leadership goes, the local church goes.
Yes. Let's get to the
third clip. So finally, we're going to see here Vodi Bakum, who has a PhD from Oxford. I think it might be in philosophy or religion. He is an amazingly brilliant mind. I don't agree with Vodi on every jot and tittle of what he says, but boy, I sure agree with a lot of it. And
he actually is a dean of a seminary in Zambia.
In Zambia, yeah. He and his family are missionaries in Zambia. So let's check out this clip from Vodi Bakum that talks about what has made so many Christians open to adopting critical race theory, or at least aspects of it. Let's check it out.
It gives us virtually no hope.
Yeah. Here's what's ironic. What's ironic is the reason that many in the church that I speak to are willing to let down the guard and welcome this stuff in is because of their love for their brothers. You've got a lot of people who look at ethnic minorities and say, I love you, I get you, let me hear you, you know? And I say it's ironic because the accusation is you don't love, you don't know, you don't understand, you don't listen, and you've got guys who are actually opening the door to a worldview that is foreign and that is hostile because of the desire to hear and give the benefit of the doubt. And here's the irony. Right now, seminaries who really want to see minorities brought in, here's the dilemma they face. If we bring one in who's one of us in terms of theology, worldview, so on and so forth, the accusation will be tokenism.
That's right.
He's not really black.
That's right.
Because critical theory is not part of what he's bringing. And then if we bring one in with critical theory, we're bringing someone in who's not part of what we're committed to delivering and communicating, right? Those things most certainly believed among us. So it's really a catch-22. And then if you do bring someone in and you know, critical theory starts to rear its head, well, what do? Do you get rid of them? Because now you're the racist who wouldn't let them have their voice.
There are certain white pastors.
Okay.
All right.
What do you think about what Vodi says here, Monique? Because I was really struck by his insight that a lot of, I think, he didn't say this explicitly, but I think he's talking about white people, like what makes white people so vulnerable to adopting aspects of critical race theory. I think it's because many Christians genuinely want to know how to love their family and friends who are people of color. They want to know how to do that. And this framework comes along and says, here's how you do it. I don't think this is a biblical way of doing it, but this offers some tangible hands and feet of here's some steps that you can do.
Yes.
And I think that there was a vacuum created because we weren't having these conversations in the church. And so then critical race theory just has come in now and said, okay, here's some steps. Here's what you do.
And here's what you don't do. And if you do this and don't do this, we will cancel you.
Yeah.
To me, what just pops in my head is just love your neighbor as yourself. You know what? I think sometimes we can make it so difficult. And that doesn't mean that there aren't things that make us different. We have different skin tones. We have different hair.
What?
We like there's things that are different about us. But that's what I was saying about how does a pastor shepherd his congregation? Because it's when I come back into the church from being in the world those other 6 days, then I'm like, hey, wow, I'm getting, you're loving me like you love yourself. Like you're not, I'm trying to think of a good example, but there's a genuine love there. Like you're not gonna ask me a question that you wouldn't yourself want to be asked. You're not going to do something to me that you wouldn't want done to yourself. The way that you do ask questions or inquire about things like my hair, for so to speak, would be in a way that would be gentle and respectful and not anything that would be harmful to you. And we're open to conversation if it is harmful. You know what I mean? Like
And
we love each other.
We allow for mistakes.
Yes.
We have grace.
Yes, there's
forgiveness.
all of that.
Yeah.
But when we bring in the world's culture,
Yeah.
There's none of that. And instead, what you get is,
There's no forgiveness in this theory.
because you're my oppressor and I have no need to go to coffee with you or desire. Like, that's what this boils down to. This framework boils down to, I am oppressed and you are my oppressor. Accept it, acknowledge it. You should be repentant and continually repenting. And I need to, I don't know, hold it over you, so to speak.
But I see such potential here. Monique and I are just starting these conversations in the last week of how do you turn this into a good, like, how do you turn this into an actual evangelism strategy? Because a year or two from now, these young people in their 20s are going to be emotionally exhausted because this paradigm doesn't actually lead to utopia.
Yeah.
It's not that train. You get on this train and it just leads to anger, division,
Striving.
It's never enough. And there's no redemption. There's no permanency of redemption. There's no forgiveness. And equity, that this grand goal of equity, you can never actually get there. I'm wondering, I feel so sad for these young people in college right now in their 20s because they think they're buying into this great system of salvation, that this great worldview that's an alternative to their parents' faith. And it's going to lead them to this emotionally broken place. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, how do we turn that into an evangelism opportunity? How do we turn that into, let me tell you about the water that never dies, that never runs out?
Or how do you turn this into unity?
Yeah.
Because this road is not going to lead us to unity.
Yeah. So, okay, now for the big question.
Yeah.
Should people use 2 hours of their life to watch this documentary?
Yes.
You think so?
Yeah. Or, I mean, they could start at minute 37. if you don't want to see the other 8 articles before Article 9, I'd say start at minute 37. So I would definitely say
go watch it.
Watch it. And then you'll get a better understanding of, how it is creeping in. This is the largest evangelical denomination in our country.
Yeah.
And if they're being plagued with it, I can't imagine what everybody else is going
And
through.
I've always perceived the Southern Baptists as being so conservative, but this has made an inroads in a really big way in a really short amount of time. And the way that the Southern Baptist Convention goes usually is a leader for other denominations. And we're already seeing the Presbyterian Church in America going down this path, and other denominations that have been stalwarts of conservative Bible theology, but they're going down this path with much rapidity. And so just know that that's out there. Would you say that this is a fair and accurate representation of critical theory, or is this more like a propaganda film that's designed to just scare people?
This is it. This is it. When they showed the trailer, at first
the trailer we did have some comments about the trailer. The trailer was very sensationalistic.
Yeah.
And it looked like it was going to be a propaganda film.
Yeah, but I feel like it's fair. I think that even the more that I continue to learn about critical theory, whatever theory, whatever you fill in the blank, I think that it is a fair representation, and the concerns put forward are very fair and valid. And then there's also snippets from different people who are proponents for critical race theory or critical theory. And those points of view we've talked about on the show. There are a couple of snippets in the film that we've shown on the show. So I think that they put forth a pretty balanced view, and definitely a view of why it is so important that we stand out and speak out against it.